Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and the lighting is a little bit washed out for this episode and a few to come, as I'm recording several at once here, and apparently wearing gray makes things just a little bit bright. I am your host, as always, Nathan P. Butler of Star Wars Beyond the Films over at StarWarsReport.com, of StarWarsFanWorks.com over at, StarWarsFanWorks.com, the Star Wars Timeline Gold also at StarWarsFanWorks.com/timeline in that case, and of course of Republic Forces Radio Network over at RepublicForces.com, where we discuss the Clone Wars each week. This time, we're taking a look at an oddball Star Wars item. We've been following mostly the different books from Del Rey and the comics from Marvel Comics. We will eventually get to the newspaper strips, which is another thing being produced by Archie Goodwin, who wrote some of the last Marvel comics that we took a look at. But in the meantime, there are some oddball items that were being produced back then, just as sometimes there are in the modern day. From October of 1977 up until, I guess it was January of 1979, Marvel was putting out a magazine called Pizzazz, right? Pizzazz! It just kind of strikes me as an odd name. It was supposed to be sort of a humorous magazine, but one of the things that it did was it told new Star Wars stories in serialized format, about 3 pages at a time in each individual issue. Now, the thing about this was that it got canceled after 16 issues. It serialized one Star Wars story known as the Keeper's World in the first 9. And then from 10 all the way up to 16, it was in the process of serializing a story sometimes called Kingdom of Ice, sometimes called War on Ice, until eventually it was canceled mid-run, kind of like what happened with Emissary of the Void back when it was being produced in Star Wars Gamer, only to wind up with Gamer getting canceled and it had to jump to Star Wars Insider. We'll handle the fate of what happened to Kingdom of Ice in our next episode of From the Star Wars Library. This time we want to focus on that first 9-part serialized story from the first 9 issues of Marvel's Pizzazz back in 77 and 78. As mentioned, the story consisted of 9 pieces, the first 2 being untitled. Then we had Dread Discovery, A Matter of Monsters, Pursuit Among the Ruins, Do You Know What Your Children Are? Caverns of Mystery, The Keeper's Secret, and The Final Fury. Again, all of which were basically 3-page serialized little tales. Now, I've never actually tried to get my hands on issues of Pizzazz. Instead, I was lucky enough to find this when it was first reprinted through Dark Horse Comics. It was released as a special American Entertainment exclusive, at least initially, entitled simply Star Wars Number 0, which, granted, makes it sound like it should be something that is special in and of itself. Not really. It's just these Pizzazz stories. So, this is the original cover of Star Wars Number 0, the American Entertainment exclusive, there with Leia, for no apparent reason other than that she's in the story here. And this is what I mean by serialized. They basically took this and put the original serialized version in here with no changes, unlike what they do with classic Star Wars. So you had sort of your opening page, second, third pages, and then to be continued next issue down here in the corner. And then the next part would again start with the Star Wars information up here at the top, a very brief recap, and then move on with the rest of the story. Now, the general gist of this story is that Luke and Leia, shortly after the Battle of Yavin, are heading off to contact another rebel cell on the planet Acuria. It's actually Acuria 2, we find out, I believe, in Kingdom of Ice, the second story, because they do continue one after the other here. And while they're in space, they wind up running into a problem. R2-D2 was damaged during the Battle of Yavin. He was fixed, but the hasty repair job wasn't good enough, and some of his circuits are kind of messed up, or some of his program is kind of messed up. So when they come out of hyperspace, they come out of hyperspace in the wrong place. Good thing they didn't hop right through a star or fly too close to a supernova, etc., 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 which they do reference in here, of course. They wind up running into some Imperial cruisers, and in trying to escape from 2 tractor beams at once, they wind up sort of pulling the cruisers at each other until they bounce off each other with their shields or some such, and in the process they damage their own ship, wind up being pulled into the gravity well of a nearby planet. That's the Keeper's World. And they eventually find themselves, as they try to hide from the Imperials, in these underground caverns. They wind up accidentally bumping into a teleporter control, basically, in some what looks like some old ruins, and teleport themselves into a cavern with this big, huge computerized system. I can actually show it to you here, of course. Looks like this here. And that is the Keeper. And the idea was that the planet was abandoned during a war, and as everybody leaves, they leave this huge, super powerful computer behind to essentially rebuild, repair, and then eventually repopulate the planet, or at least get it ready for repopulation by sentient beings, by also repopulating it, or somehow being a custodian of wild species, because there are wild species here, even though there are no sentients here. He also created his own children, so to speak. These individuals who seem to be a little bit different than a regular sentient human being, but these children have the power to control earth, fire, air, and water, right? Elemental children here. Captain Planet! All we need is someone with heart. So, amongst these children, Luke and Leia find some solace. They find some safety from the Imperials who are coming, and eventually we get this kind of knockdown, drag-out battle between our heroes, Luke, Leia, R2, C-3PO, the 4 children, and the Keeper versus the Imperials, until the Imperials wind up being driven off the planet by different things that the Keeper is causing to happen, because it controls the environment. And that harsh environment, in theory, should keep anyone from ever wanting to go back to the planet and disturbing it while the Keeper is doing his work to revitalize it. It's still not a good place for a rebel base or anything like that, but thankfully, Luke, Leia, and the droids are safe, and now they can head off, because their ship has been repaired by the Keeper as well, to eventually make their way to Akiria 2 for the next story, Kingdom of Ice. It's not a particularly interesting story. It is interesting to note, however, that it's written by both of the writers who are the main writers of the Marvel series that we've looked at thus far. Remember, Roy Thomas wrote the adaptation of A New Hope, and then wrote most of the story. Eventually, Don Glutt, for instance, came in, but wrote most of the story tying into the stuff for Aduba 3, that second story arc. Well, Roy Thomas writes the first chunk of this story, but then he hands it off to Archie Goodwin, who will then write a lot also of the Marvel series, also of the newspaper strips, and we saw him in our most recent stories 11 through 15 from the Marvel run. So it's interesting to see that both of them are writing for this. They were Marvel writers writing for the original Marvel Star Wars series, and here they are back again. Now, these stories were collected elsewhere. They were collected back in issues 47 to 50 of Marvel UK's Star Wars Weekly. Not something we're covering here until those stories are reprinted in American publications. Also, Star Wars number 0 seems to have gotten multiple printings. This one is dated, I don't know if you'll be able to see it well on there or not, June 1997. However, many sources note this as being a comic from June of 1999. So I'm wondering if those later printings with the different covers really were from then, or if they were all produced at the same time as this. I haven't actually got my hands on any of the later printings of it. This was the first time it was ever collected and produced by Dark Horse Comics, and again, I tend to go for first format things. So, The Keeper's World. The questions, of course, as always, are, is it an essential read? Is it something you can skip? Yeah, you've probably already guessed both of these at this point. Is it an essential read? Absolutely not. The only thing this would be essential for is to know exactly where Luke and Leia were before they wound up in the story of Kingdom of Ice, which you also will probably not wind up reading. Can it be skipped? Absolutely. Is it a good story? Honestly, it's not a great story, but it does have a couple of interesting elements in it. We do get one moment where it seems like they hadn't quite figured out what they wanted to do with the TIE fighters yet, because the Imperials wind up here, let's see, where is that? Okay, we see a TIE fighter flying down here, okay? Except in the TIE fighter, you've got an Imperial officer and a whole bunch of stormtroopers getting ready to disembark. It's like a super TIE fighter, I guess, of some kind, as a landing craft. That in and of itself was a little interesting when I ran across it. Also, it should be noted that Star Wars serialized stories are not anything new, but people who are fans of Star Wars now probably haven't thought about Pizzazz in a while. If they think about serialized stories early on, they're probably thinking the newspaper strips, which were recently reprinted on StarWars.com's hyperspace before they turned it into a dumbed-down, look at all the pictures kind of website. However, recently we have seen something serialized in a similar form, just a few pages at a time rather than having one strip at a time. That was The Old Republic. When Star Wars The Old Republic, the MMO, was launching, and they did those little stories like the Treaty of Coruscant as quick little stories serialized on the website before issuing them as individual comic issues like this one. And I gotta say, honestly, the serialization was handled better and reads better eventually when collected as one whole in this, far more than in the Old Republic stuff. So at least if you're looking for something serialized, this can maybe show you how to do it right. With that, we'll close out this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode, in which we'll take a look at Kingdom of, or War on, Ice, also from Pizzazz. As always, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.